Hello and welcome to the last in this year's series of GSA Snapshot Webinars. Over the course of this year, these 30-minute sessions have drawn on the depth and breadth of GSA research to provide insights into the current state of 4G and 5G networks, technologies, spectrum and devices globally. In today's snapshot, the team are going to tie it all together and share a comprehensive review of the key global data points behind 5G rollouts, private mobile networks, fixed wireless access, 5G experience, and the emergence of non-terrestrial 5G networks. First, a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into today's event. We're joined by Simon Bryant, VP Research for GSA. Simon will be sharing the data. There will hopefully be some time for Q&A when we get to the end. We'll certainly try and answer as many as we can. You can pose any questions as we go along using the Q&A function on the sidebar. So as we go through, ask them and we'll address as many as we can at the end. The on-demand recording will be shared with you immediately following the event, along with a link to these presentation slides. You'll also download the slides at any point during the presentation by just moving your mouse over the slides and clicking the download icon. But first, to get things started, I'll hand over to Simon to kick things off.
Thank you very much, Richard. Welcome to this roundup of 5G in 2023 and prospects for 2024. All based on GSA research. I'd like to start the presentation by giving you a bit of an overview of GSA. Established in 1998, GSA represents the global mobile ecosystem for equipment and infrastructure companies. We have 9 major executive members and nearly 90 associate member companies, including manufacturers, silicon vendors, regulators, analyst firms, and operators. Our extensive research covers various 3GPP related areas, and we offer both free and member research reports. The Gambod database has now become a critical source of information for the telecom industry. The research we produce and that you're going to see in this presentation today is based on extensive desk research that's conducted on a daily basis, and in some cases primary data supplied confidentially by members of GSA via the research team. As well as the research that we produce, we have several focused working groups and forums, including the 4G, 5G Fixed Wireless Access Forum, the Spectrum Group, a Standards Group, and the Private Networks Special Interest Group. Our research covers many critical areas across 3GPP, including devices, public network operators, private networks, spectrum, and chipsets. The comprehensive coverage provides a holistic view of the 5G landscape, which we're going to be sharing with you in this presentation today. GSA has invested in expanding our research program in recent months, and users of Gambod will see much more information over the months ahead and going into 2024. In turn, that will be reflected in the reports that we produce and that you see. This expansion includes enriching the Gambod database with more research, primary and desk research, including important data such as 5G subscriber data, 5G speeds and experiences from our partner OpenSignal, eSIM information, 2G and 3G switch-off information, and much more. And all of this segmented by operator and by country. Now diving into some of the trends related to 5G. Now, while it may seem that 5G has already been around for a long time, the reality is that we are still at the foundational level, and much of the true benefit of 5G is yet to come. With the release 17 chipsets and products beginning to enter the ecosystem, and the finalizing of release 18 items, we are beginning to move into a new stage of 5G Advanced from 2024. 5G Advanced builds upon the efforts of the last few years to unlock several advantages, including faster speeds, better spectrum utilization, enhanced mobility, and lower costs of IoT devices. All of this sets the stage for cleaner, greener, and smarter networks, such as cloud-native virtualized networks leveraging AI data-driven insights. This development leads to an enhanced service offering for both enterprises and consumers. For example, the introduction of 5G RedCap, along with improved positioning accuracy, brings advanced functionality and expanded use cases to the enterprise market. Simultaneously, consumers benefit from faster, more accessible fixed wireless access and enriched mobile broadband services. In 2023, we witnessed continued progress in 5G rollout and adoption. Over 578 operators worldwide have now invested in 5G, a 10% increase from a year previously. Among them, 300 operators have launched or soft-launched commercial 5G services, accounting for 52% of all operators investing in 5G. This growth demonstrates the industry's commitment to expanding 5G services globally. While much of North America and Europe has already rolled out 5G services, this year we saw, via our research, 17 new countries launching their first 5G network. Populous countries like Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya joined the 5G movement. As a result, we now see that 113 countries now have a commercial deployment of 5G. Additionally, 59 countries are investing in 5G, with plans to launch services in the coming years, particularly in regions such as South Asia, Africa, and Central America. Despite this progress, it's fair to say that global ubiquitous adoption is still only on the horizon. The strategic allocation of spectrum plays a critical role in the successful deployment of 5G networks, ensuring the delivery of promised high speeds, low latency, and capacity-rich services. Among the various allocated bands, the C-band, N77 and N78 at the top of that chart, stands out as the preferred spectrum for 5G among most operators. This band strikes a good balance between coverage and speeds, and further bolstered by a standardized ecosystem of compatible devices. While millimeter wave spectrum, including N257, 258, and 261 bands, rank as the next significant band, its deployment in the dark blue segment of that bar ranks as the second most. Its deployment has in some cases fallen short of initial expectations. Currently, most commercial deployments serve fixed wireless access, with many operators either just holding licenses or in testing phases due to obstacles such as mobility and range, as well as a shortage of compatible devices. However, from next year, with the evolution of 5G Advanced and advancements in millimeter wave radio hardware, we can anticipate an upsurge in 5G services harnessing this spectrum band for a wider range of use cases. If we look at the 5G device ecosystem now, it continues to grow and change in its mix. In our latest report, 2,036 5G devices were counted. While smartphones and fixed wireless access CPE still make up most of these devices, around 2/3, we have witnessed a shift towards industrial devices and IoT applications. This diversification of 5G devices reflects the growing demand for 5G across various sectors and new use cases. Moving forward, we expect this to diversify even further. 5G standalone networks represent a significant step forward in the 5G journey. A cloud-based, virtualized, microservices-based core infrastructure characterizes these networks. They offer several benefits, including faster connection times and lower latency, support for massive numbers of devices, programmable systems for agile service creation, and improved management of service-level agreements. Additionally, introducing VoNR technology, voice over new radio, is a notable advancement. We recently reported that 121 operators in 55 countries are investing in 5G standalone networks, accounting for 21% of the 578 operators with 5G networks. Furthermore, 47 operators in 27 countries have already launched 5G standalone networks, while 21 are currently deploying them now, with an additional 49 planning to deploy shortly. Despite economic headwinds, which has slowed investment in recent years, 5G standalone is expected to simplify network infrastructures, enhance security, and reduce costs. From a geographic standpoint, the adoption of standalone 5G is concentrated in developed markets. Excuse me. North America, Asia, and Europe are witnessing the highest number of network launches. Large operators like Etisalat in the UAE, Telefonica Spain, and Reliance Jio in India have already launched networks based on standalone 5G. We think these developments reflect the ongoing efforts to unlock the potential of 5G standalone technologies. Private mobile networks are emerging as a critical component within 5G, and particularly within standalone. Here we are looking at our latest data, which was published only earlier this week. GSA defines customer references here as unique organizations deploying one or more LTE or 5G networks with more than €100,000. As of the third quarter of 2023, 1,279 customer references are deploying at least one network. In some cases, they're deploying multiple networks. During this quarter, we saw an addition of 67 customer references in our database, which marked growth from the previous quarter. Notably, 76 countries now worldwide have at least one private mobile network, with Costa Rica and Tanzania adding their first networks in the latest reporting round. Among the top 10 reporting countries, the Republic of Korea stands out, with growth exceeding 10% from the previous quarter. The US, Sweden, and Germany also reported healthy growth of 6%, 5%, and 4% growth respectively. These figures underscore the increasing significance of private mobile networks within the 5G ecosystem on a global scale. While GSA tracks what we call dedicated deployment models, where the operator is not directly involved, it's important to recognize the growing prominence of operator-led models, commonly referred to as virtual and hybrid models. Dedicated networks are primarily found in mature markets, with the United States, Germany, the UK, and Japan having some of the most references at a country level globally. It's worth noting that despite a high number of private mobile networks deployed in China, they primarily use the public network and therefore do not fall within our definition of dedicated networks. Virtual and hybrid models, however, are gaining traction and could represent up to 2/3 of total private networks when you count operator models within the overall mix. Although there is considerable excitement around 5G's potential within private mobile networks, it may be a surprise that LTE constitutes the majority of customer deployments, accounting for at least 53% of references. This reflects the continued reliance on LTE for various use cases, as well as a limited device ecosystem for affordable industrial 5G devices, also higher implementation costs and unproven use cases for 5G as things stand today. But 5G is gaining ground, with 45% of these customers deploying private mobile networks based on our latest count. However, many 5G deployments currently lean towards trials and deployments within educational and testbed or validation facilities. A limited number of 5G deployments are operating in industrial settings. It is also fair to say that 5G deployments generally represent higher values relative to LTE in terms of their deployments. The adoption of private mobile networks varies across sectors, verticals, and use cases. Manufacturing, education, and mining remain the top 3 sectors for customer references within our tracking. However, it's important to note that the number of references does not necessarily reflect the size and scale of deployments, which can vary significantly by each of the verticals you can see in that list. And within our tracking, we track many more beyond the ones that you can see in that chart. Among the top vertical markets, education and academic research saw the highest growth in our last update, up by 10% from the previous quarter. Confidentiality is a common feature of many references within our tracking of this market. On average, 66% of references included in our database are not public and are unique to GSA's tracking of this space. GSA Private Mobile Network Special Interest Group members submit these references, contributing to a wealth of industry-specific knowledge. Some sectors, such as military and defense, maritime, and power plants, exhibit even higher levels of non-public references, with over 80% of references remaining confidential beyond this tracking methodology. Now turning attention to fixed wireless access, this area is gaining momentum within the 5G ecosystem. While most fixed wireless access services still rely on 4G technology, with 436 launch services compared to 5G's 152, 5G is growing steadily. Geographic coverage for 5G fixed wireless access has expanded across regions, including North America, Europe, Oceania, and the Gulf. For instance, the European Union boasts now 66 launched 5G fixed wireless access services, now present across most of the EU's markets. Looking at some data from our annual 4G, 5G fixed wireless access forum survey from earlier this summer, the trend toward 5G is also reflected in the number of 5G CPE shipments, which doubled in 2022, reaching 7.4 million units, equivalent to 29% of all shipments. The figure was expected to nearly double again by the end of this year, with an anticipated total of 13.8 million units, constituting 40% of all fixed wireless access CPE shipments. This rapid growth underscores the increasing relevance of 5G fixed wireless access as a broadband connectivity solution, as an alternative to fiber. Additionally, millimeter wave shipments have been recorded, with some operators opting to utilize FR2 spectrum to deliver high-speed fixed wireless access services, particularly in markets like the US. However, millimeter wave CPE shipments remain relatively small, accounting for just 6% of 5G CPE shipments in 2022 and 2023. This reflects, we think, the early stage of adoption of millimeter wave technology. Despite the growing adoption of 5G fixed wireless access, one limiting factor is its widespread the higher cost of 5G CPE compared to 4G. The cost differential is particularly pronounced in developing markets where ARPU tends to be lower. In the GSA Forum survey earlier this year, respondents expected 5G price points to reach parity with 5G by 2025, based on factors which include supply-side improvements, reduced component costs, and improving economies of scale. The growing availability of RedCap technology, as I mentioned earlier, is also expected to accelerate the further reduction in the price of 5G CPE. Now turning our attention to 5G performance, a critical aspect of 5G. And to measure it effectively, we have partnered with OpenSignal to include their valuable performance metrics in GSA's Gambot database. One of the key metrics we've integrated is 5G availability. This metric measures what proportion of time people have a network connection in the places they most commonly frequent. T-Mobile in Puerto Rico leads the pack with an impressive 63% availability, significantly higher than that of other operators in the list. T-Mobile in the US, known for its proactive 5G standalone initiatives, ranks second with 52% availability. Looking down the list of the top 10, we see some familiar countries: Kuwait with STC and Ooredoo and Zain, Taiwan with GT and Far East Tone, and South Korea with the remaining operators. With Taiwan and South Korea, half of the top 10 operators are based in Eastern Asia. Now, actual downlink and uplink speeds are perhaps one of the most important metrics we can measure. An open signal data represents a user's typical everyday speeds that they achieve across a network. Looking first at download speeds, South Korea again makes its presence known. SK Telecom has an average download speed of 462 megabits per second, improving its high 152 LTE speeds. Similarly, LGU Plus and KT also enter the top 10 with LTE speeds of over 100 megabits per second. And my final slide before we wrap up for questions is around the emergence of non-terrestrial networks, a key theme in the industry this year. Non-terrestrial networks now are opening up new possibilities in the era of 5G, enabling connectivity in remote areas, supporting IoT applications, and providing high-speed broadband in previously undeserved regions. GSA categorized 70 partnerships between operators and satellite constellations, such as SES, OneWeb, and AST Space Mobile. We have segmented NTN activity into satellite voice and data services, which includes satellite phones used in remote areas and in emergency situations typically, IoT machine-to-machine satellite services in industries such as transportation, energy, agriculture, and disaster management, and rural and enterprise broadband. Satellite-based broadband services offering high-speed internet access in rural or remote areas where terrestrial broadband infrastructure is limited or just completely unavailable. Over the coming years, these developments will transform how we can connect and communicate, and satellite networks will increasingly become parts of the 3GPP story through release 17 and 18 and beyond. That concludes my presentation. I'd like now to introduce my colleague, Luke Pierce, who's been looking at some of the questions, and he might be able to answer some of them. And there's still a bit of time if anyone wants to submit any other questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Simon. Thanks for that presentation. Yeah, we've certainly had some questions come in whilst you've been talking, and I anticipate there'll be a few more as well. So if you haven't done already, please submit your question and we'll try and get around to it if we can. One of the questions is around dedicated spectrum for private networks, Simon. What countries have dedicated spectrum? How important is it, is a question. Do you think you could take that one?
Actually, would you mind taking that one?
Yeah, so there are a number of different countries. I think CBRS in the US is one that's quite well known, and has been, there are lots of enterprises using that spectrum in the US. We also see a number across Europe. Germany, for instance, has private 5G spectrum. The UK has some shared access spectrum as well. So actually, I think it's around 20 plus countries now have some kind of dedicated spectrum or spectrum sharing within that frequency allocation. So that is included in the private network report. So for more detail, please look at that one. We've got another question about the estimated growth for private networks over the next 5 years. Is that something you can comment on, Simon?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at private mobile networks, and one of the ways and one of the reasons that the GSA decided to track it was to have a transparent methodology, and we were looking at customers. Looking at customers of dedicated networks, I think we've seen pretty healthy growth, 10% year on year for the last couple of years, and I think that is probably going to continue. I think where we do see probably stronger growth levels is in virtual and hybrid networks, because we're now seeing operators really commit investment to some of those technologies. Also, there's another layer of looking at private mobile networks, which is not just looking at the customers, but it's looking at the number of deployments that they are launching. And we do see that growing. So we do see where companies are committed to private mobile networks, they're adding more networks and applying private mobile networks to more locations and more use cases. So, and they're spending more as well, and 5G brings more spending. So I think over a longer period, you could look at sort of 15% CAGR over the next sort of 5 to 10 years in terms of private mobile network growth, if you look at networks and revenues.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of answers another question we had as well, also on private networks, around what is the average number of private networks or locations per customer reference? Is there any guidance you can provide on that? That's not something we kind of publish in the report, and it varies vertical by vertical, doesn't it?
I think, and Luke will correct me if I'm wrong here, because he's also close to this, but I think generally what we see is around 2 to 3 networks per customer is generally the average. It's not something we necessarily pick up with the GSA methodology, but it's something that we have visibility of. There are some verticals and some customers who have many, many more than that, but then there's many who will just have one network. So, but generally the average would be around 2 to 3, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with that. And yeah, it does vary vertical by vertical. Generally with kind of factories, which is what most people focus on, we are at a stage where we're starting to see some companies deploy an additional private network in another country, like BMW, for instance. I think they now have 3 or 4 manufacturing locations across a number of different countries. But yeah, I think that if you take the whole total average, it would be between 2 to 3. So let's move away a little bit from private networks now. There's one question about RedCap deployment and how that is in progress in which regions. I think it is early stages for RedCap. We'll be having that report in early next year, which will be able to kind of track that in terms of the operators and the devices that are using RedCap. So stay tuned for that early next year. There's one about millimeter wave for 5G for fixed wireless access in home and residential areas. Why hasn't it gained momentum despite the technology being available? Is it line of sight? I think to comment on that, it has in some markets millimeter wave fixed wireless access. We see some of the operators in the US leveraging millimeter wave, Japan as well. The operators there are as well, and Australia with the national broadband network have also started using kind of millimeter wave kind of going forward for their fixed wireless access offering. So it is available in the market. There are a few operators using it, but there are a number of issues, as you mentioned a couple in the question, that line of sight is an issue, range is an issue as well. There are things being done to try and solve that. Combining millimeter wave with C-band spectrum, for instance, really helps expand the range of that, and using outdoor CPEs and things like that for line of sight. But I think another thing that's holding it back is the cost of the CPE devices. We've seen already in one of the charts Simon shown about the 5G CPE, but then millimeter wave 5G CPE products are even greater cost than that. So within the kind of survey that we do with the Fixed Wireless Access Forum group, we can see that millimeter wave shipments are there, but they are still quite a small proportion of the overall pie. So there's a couple more as well to do with satellite we're getting in now as well. Is the direct-to-device network heading to competition with 4G and 5G in big cities, or will it just help the operators to amplify coverage in rural areas? Is there any comments on that, Simon?
Not really. There's a lot of questions here that I think we can get back to, unless you've got a response on that, Luke.
I think there is a lot of interesting stuff happening with direct-to-device. As Simon mentioned, there's lots of partnerships going on with operators. Operators, by partnering with these satellite vendors, they're able to offer it's still quite basic kind of text and emergency SOS coverage. It's quite an attractive proposition for an operator to be able to partner with one of those satellite vendors. It won't yet kind of compete with 4G and 5G in the big cities yet, because the service that you're getting from that is very basic at the moment. It's, as I mentioned, emergency SOS, or quite basic texting functionalities, kind of a 2G experience yet. So, you know, with NTN becoming part of the kind of release 17 and 18 framework, you know, we will hopefully start to see NTN being used more in the 3GPP standards, but where it's providing competition with 4G and 5G for big cities, that's going to be still quite a few years away yet, I think.
Thanks very much. I think that's nearly at the end. There's one question here that maybe you've got a view on as well, Luke, is 5G slicing and how much that's been deployed. Is that anything that we've got visibility on?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of slicing, in order to have that, the prerequisite is, you know, having 5G standalone core. And Simon mentioned that is growing, but it is still quite small. But there are a number of operators with that kind of 5G standalone core. But yeah, so there are operators, particularly in kind of trials and evaluation functionality, doing network slicing. We mentioned obviously the example of China and using a kind of variation of network slicing there with the 5G core to offer that kind of B2B connectivity. So there is a lot of interesting stuff happening in the mainland China market there as well. So there is definitely some trials and a few instances where slicing's been deployed for private mobile networks, but we're still quite at the early stage of development. Still, maybe for majority of kind of European operators, at least, it's still probably a year or two away until we start to see that being a commercial reality. As you know, the commercial, although technically it might be possible, there's still things that need to be worked out with the commercial business models as well.
Very good. Thank you, Luke. We've come to the end of the half hour, so thank you for listening. I'm going to hand back to Richard.
Great, thank you very much. And I just close today's session by once again thanking Simon and Luke, and thanking you all for joining us today. As we said up top, after the event, you will receive a link to the webinar recording and to the slides. Access to all the data that Simon and Luke have been going through today, and the data behind these charts, is available to all employees of GSA member and associate organisations via the GSA website. If you'd like more information on how your organisation can get involved with GSA and access this extensive database, then please do get in touch. In the new year, we'll publish our calendar of events for 2024. And again, we'll dig into the key reports, the global data and trends that are being tracked by our research team. In the meantime, if you'd like to revisit any of this year's events, you'll see on-demand recordings available on the webinar section in the GSA website and via our YouTube channel. For the latest updates on GSA research activities and our upcoming events, please do follow us on our social channels. And if you visit gsacom.com, you can subscribe to our weekly Research Digest email, so you get all the latest reports delivered straight into your inbox every Monday morning. On behalf of the GSA team, all that then remains for me to say is thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you again soon at the next GSA event in the new year. Many thanks.